The first cover in the Goosebumps series certainly lives up to its name. The low angle, looking up broken down stairs to the open door gives the appearance of the house looming over the reader. The orange glow coming from the door and the window are as ominous as the unsettling figure barely visible in the right window. There's no mistaking it, this is a horror book. Dare the reader enter? This cover was one of the two that was not originally done by Tim Jacobus. Instead, this cover was done by Jim Thiessen. As author R.L. Stine notes, one of my favorite books from the series features cover art by Jim Thiessen, with more realistic rendering and perspective. Thiessen's style was a bit more adult and realistic than the ultra-saturated and cartoonish scenes painted by Jacobus. It's no surprise Jim went to work as a major player in the field of horror literature. Jacobus eventually got his own crack at the art for the book when he designed the cover for the 2003 reprint. His version features Dr. Brewer's clone, appearing here as a monstrous tree-like person, standing in front of a lab table. He holds a beaker in one hand, and behind him are several mysterious vials filled with colorful liquids. The effect might be less frightening than the original, but it raises a question for the reader to answer, creating a sense of excitement. In what would become a hallmark of the style of the original series art, Jacobus never painted red blood. On this cover, the titular blood is green and slime-like, and it pools down the stairs, giving the image an illusion of motion. Ominously, a pair of glasses sits in the puddle of fluid, inviting the imagination to conjure up several possibilities about the whereabouts of the owner. The cover for this novel is the start of what would become an essential ingredient in most of the series covers, the juxtaposition of a normal-looking subject matter with a grotesque element. In this case, the cover features a seemingly happy family enjoying a barbecue on a sunny day. The only catch is that they're all skeletons. This cover was so beloved by the Scholastic team that, when they realized that there was no scene in the book resembling the art, they called R.L. Stine and asked him to add the moment into the story. Stine ingeniously added the scene as a dream sequence. The cover is also noteworthy for being the first to feature what would become a bit of a running visual gag: Converse shoes. Jacobus loves Converse, and almost every shoe featured on the cover of the entire series are red, black, or blue Converse. Evoking a very traditional image of a classic tale, this cover features a mummy wrapped in white bandages with frightening, glowing red eyes. Jacobus originally sketched the mummy with human eyes, but decided to use the glow instead to make the mummy's head seem more hollow. He used the round-cut stonework around the mummy's head to create a dramatic framing, and added touches of pinks and purples to the dark shadows to help the monster pop out. A young boy in an orange sweater stands in front of a tall mirror. The light shining through a single bulb and the blue background are disquieting, suggesting stillness and loneliness. Through Max Thompson's eyeline, the reader's own eye is drawn to the image of the child in the mirror, where the lower half of his body is disappearing. Much like Jason in the original movie of the Friday the 13th franchise, Slappy is getting cover credit despite not being the main villain of the story. Mr. Wood is the actual antagonist dummy of this book, though Slappy becomes the central figure of the subsequent Living Dummy novels. The use of shadow is what really draws the eye in on this cover. Slappy's cheerful smile and tidy hair and the outfit only add to the sinister insinuations caused by the glow of his green eyes from the shadows. It should be noted that Slappy's eyes are described as blue in the book, but on both the original cover and the 2008 cover, he is depicted with green eyes. The purple of the library contrasts with the orange of the door frame, which pulls the reader to the image of Lucy Dark looking on in horror at the scene to the forefront. Her shirt would have been modern the year that the book came out, but looking on it now, it looks wonderfully 90s. Mr. Morton, the monster in question, has the haircut, hat, and glasses to indicate how uncool he is, immediately suggesting nerd, if not librarian. The blue light used around his eyes suggests a sick delight at the prospect of his tasty insect snack. This is the first cover in the series to feature a human adult. Although the girl on the cover is a model, the librarian is actually Jacobus himself. He thought that it would be funny to draw himself as bald, because at the time he had lots of hair. For some reason, now that he actually is bald, he doesn't find the image quite as funny. The eerie glow of the green tin almost distracts from the dark creature peering into the open flap. However, the glowing eyes ensure that the monster is just visible enough to be mysterious and terrifying. In the background, the twisted, bare branches and roiling clouds add to the unsettling feel of the cover. The success of the book, Welcome to Camp Nightmare, inspired Stein to release camp-themed stories every summer from 1995 to 1999, including The Horror at Camp Jelly Jam, Ghost Camp, The Curse of Camp Cold Lake, Fright Camp, and Return to Ghost Camp. The Ghost Next Door is another cover that blends the normal with the supernatural. The pleasant, average welcome sign and the familiar kitchen tiles contrast with the outline of a ghost standing at the door. Once again, we see the use of Converse shoes by Jacobus. A quintessential Goosebumps cover, the disgusting, creepy, sickly green mask is juxtaposed with the image of a sweet young girl. The overalls suggest innocence, with the dripping sharp fangs suggesting horror. This cover is perfectly mysterious and unsettling. To create it, Jacobus enlisted the help of his niece, Jessie, to be the model. Jessie held up Jacobus's dad's old rubber mask, which had been used as the head of a scarecrow before its big debut on a book cover. Jacobus snapped a picture of the scene and used it to create the now iconic artwork. One of the only two books in the initial Goosebumps run to feature cover art by an artist other than Jacobus, this cover was created by Stanislaw Fernandez. Fernandez brings his unique style, which utilizes a flat, modern look, to the Goosebumps aesthetic with his use of purples and shadows. The illustration shows Samantha Bird with an expression of fear, or possibly curiosity, on her face. Clarissa's hands are visible over the crystal ball. Jacobus was on vacation, which is why he was unavailable to create the cover. He eventually designed the 2005 reprint, which shows Clarissa holding a crystal ball in the rain. Eerie smoke gathers around her, and the strange perspective gives the cover a surreal feel. Although technically the disembodied hands playing the piano are free of any gore, Jacobus's use of bright red for the background immediately brings to mind the idea of blood. This subtle technique raises the subconscious horror level of the cover, causing the reader to perhaps imagine a scene more gruesome than what is actually depicted. The classic image of a wolf howling at the bright full moon is given the Goosebumps treatment, as the realistic-looking wolf is against a background of a neon green swamp and hazy purple sky. The other indication that this is not just an ordinary wolf is the pile of clothes, a t-shirt and a hat, on the rock next to the creature. Further showing the evolution of the series, this was the first book to feature a page-long advertisement for the next Goosebumps novel. Given the main monsters of this book are called mud monsters, it only makes sense that this cover is one of the few to feature browns as the main color scheme. The disgusting mud monsters rise up from the stony creek bed, surrounded by a sickly yellow-green haze. Jacobus added oranges, greens, and even a few tiny dashes of blue and purple to break up the neutral tone of the scene. Another great example of blending a familiar scene with the unfamiliar, this cover features a giant horror unable to fully hide behind the Horrorland billboard. Jacobus used blues and muted greens to suggest loneliness and abandonment, with the amusement park lit slightly with orange to hint that the night is falling. The red paint of the welcome sign drips ominously like blood. The overall effect is creepy without being overtly so. As R.L. Stine put, this is one of my favorite books, and fans agree. A 2015 poll of the official Scholastic Tumblr page resulted in Welcome to Horrorland as the winner for the favorite book in the original series. This cover features gorgeous green trees, a beautiful sunrise, and a bee with the terrified expression of a young boy. The flight over the trees and in the reader's direction gives us more of the sense of adventure than the usual horror vibes of many of the other Goosebumps covers. The use of Gary Lutz's head on the bee body is both metaphorical because he only swaps minds with a bee, but also reminiscent of the classic horror film The Fly from 1958. Interestingly enough, and possibly owing the brightness to the colors used, this is the only original Goosebumps cover to use black text for the tagline. Another quintessential Jacobus cover, Monster Blood 2, depicts Cuddles the hamster breaking through his cage. Monster blood drips down the top of the desk, and the ripped cage and Cuddles' ferocious teeth suggest that this is no ordinary class hamster. Looking at the alphabet and tiled ceiling, it becomes clear that curved perspective, almost like a fisheye lens, is being utilized, invoking the feeling of a waking nightmare. This is the first of many sequels in the original Goosebumps series. The only similarity between the covers of the first and second books in the Monster Blood series is the green, viscous blood. Inspired by the movie Jaws from 1975, this cover plays on a common fear: what lies waiting for us beneath deep water. To create the realistic look of the weightless limbs dangling in the water, Jacobus had his friend, Donnie, sit on a stool in his backyard. He used cuts of light green into the blue to show the sun shining down into the water, and his trademark purple shows up in the underwater foliage. For the hammerhead shark, Jacobus used pictures from an encyclopedia. Scarecrows are already generally a creepy subject. The cover depicts a seemingly average scarecrow in a cornfield with a bright, full moon and stars overhead in the purple sky. Only two things suggest that this is not an ordinary sack of straw and sticks. First off, the alarming, ruddy light shining in from the bottom of the illustration suggests fire. Secondly, the eyes of the scarecrow look startlingly realistic and alive. Many Goosebumps cover illustrations mix something mundane with something horrifying, but this cover is instead a combination of two scary things: math homework and worms. The segmented purple worms burst through the yellow pages of the notebook, showing the reader exactly what they're getting into. In his autobiography, Jacobus suggests using different colors to elicit responses and to make the viewer feel something. He suggests black, gray, and deep blue for dark and gloomy moods, red and orange for fiery feelings, and soft blues and greens for calm and peaceful moods. The blues and greens of this illustration are calming despite the enormous ghost, making the overall effect an eerie, quiet vibe. You can practically hear the ocean. The mood is completed with the trademark Jacobus full moon, and ominous swirling clouds and hooded figure rising from the tombstone. The second sequel in the Goosebumps series, this cover is a direct callback to The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb, featuring a repeat of the blue stone circle motif. This version of the stone circle is a bit larger, and we see more of the mummy, this time with a beautiful gold and blue sarcophagus covering Prince Koru's face. With all the drama of a classic movie poster, this book cover depicts the easily recognizable Phantom of the Opera character that inspired this story. The use of highlights on the magenta curtains creates the feeling of movement, and the glowing green light shining from behind the curtains sets an ominous tone. In an homage to comic book heroes, the masked mutant springs forward on this cover in a traditional superhero pose, complete with flaring cape and bulging muscles. Behind him rises the secret lair, set in the woods near an imposing fence. The use of white color to recreate lens flares on the sides of the building creates a metallic look that's perfect for a villain's hideout. The purple sky lightens to pink near the tree lines, hinting at sunrise or sunset. A classic Goosebumps cover, the tousle-haired child in a quintessentially 90s sweater is placed in a surreal situation. Larry's face shows shock at his hairy hands, and the blues used in the bathroom and the bright whites from the lighting juxtaposes the thick, dark hair. The image calls to mind scenes from a werewolf movie, the moment when the character realizes their nightmare is coming true. The stone archway on this cover serves both to highlight and shadow the central figure, the Lord High Executioner. It accomplishes this through the diagonal that cuts across him, separating the warm brown stone from the cool blue stone, giving the character the impression of stepping forward from the shadow towards the reader. The green clothes, axe, and black executioner's mask immediately suggests that the figure is a villain, and Jacobus added lines of white to the axe to imitate the glint of metal. It should be noted that this cover was one of Jacobus's least favorite of the series and the hardest he has ever had to paint. Jacobus ran into a deadline issue and did not have the normal amount of time he uses to work on the book cover. He completed the illustration in a 30-hour marathon as quickly as he could, though he doesn't think that anyone could tell that it was rushed. According to Jacobus, this was one of the titles he was sent that made him laugh. It does sound a bit ridiculous, as cuckoo clocks are normally associated with old and gentle things. Perhaps playing on that idea, the cuckoo featured in this illustration is incredibly unsettling. It almost looks like a Tweety bird or a smaller version of Big Bird, but the flat-looking blue eyes and slightly lifted wings suggest a predatory fowl, such as a hawk. Jacobus uses the strange perspective to create movement. The bird appears to leap out of the clock in the background. The colors and lines on the wall leading up from the single-tone red floor helps to heighten the feeling of movement within the illustration. Jacobus's color choices for the skies in his illustrations often give the impression of an in-between time, either dusk or dawn. The yellow-green leaves closest to the subject of the illustration serve to pull the sunlight towards the reader, with the purple leaves subtly giving the impression of shadow to highlight this effect. It should be noted that this was the first threequel in the series. This cover continues the tradition of featuring the titular Monster Blood as green slime. It also once again features Jacobus's use of Converse shoes, this time in enormous form. An ordinary scene of a kitchen sink, and all of the junk people tend to put under their sinks, is marred by the unsettling reptilian green eyes of the gruel. In this cover, Jacobus uses color to give the impression of shadow and light. The tiles on the floor are blue and red in the shadow, but blue and orange in the light. Likewise, the area under the sink is purple in the shadows and orange in the light. The blues and purples above the sink do not actually follow a light source. Instead, the blue halo serves to draw the reader's eyes down the center image. Perhaps the prettiest cover ever created for a horror book, Night of the Living Dummy 2 features a little girl's dream room with a fancy pink bed and flowery wallpaper. The green and blue lines of the wallpaper are used to distort the image slightly, giving it a dreamlike quality. The illusion of a beautiful scene is ruined by the terror on the stuffed animal's face and by Slappy himself. The rumpled clothes and red mouth of the creepy dummy are dramatically out of place with the rest of the room. Exceptionally astute readers may notice that the eyes are blue on this cover, matching the description of the book, as opposed to the green eyes displayed on the first cover of the series. This is the first book in the Living Dummy series to feature Slappy as the lead villain. Featuring a truly terrifying looking dog, at first glance this appears to be one of the simplest Goosebump covers. On closer inspection, the gorgeous color blending can be seen in the background, and the hues used in the titular ghost range from red to blue to white. The tiny pupils used for the red eyes give the impression of evil orbs, telling the reader that this is no ordinary dog. The Barking Ghost is the last of the Goosebumps books to get an original cover in the UK line. It only took 30 books for Jacobus to win them over. Notice anything familiar about the creepy, grinning figure of the camp counselor? This was yet another character modeled after Jacobus himself, who wore high-waisted pants and a baseball cap to create the image. The too large mouth and wide eyes of the character are unsettling, as is the storm-darkened sky in the background. The touches of orange above the tree line lend an ominous feeling to the image. A light mist is in the background near the boarding room-style houses, completing the picture of an unappealing campsite. Unlike the normal, smiling gnomes of well-manicured lawns, the gnomes on this cover have a serious attitude problem. However, Chip and Hap originally had even more sass. When Jacobus first turned in the art for Revenge of the Lawn Gnomes, the gnome on the left was picking his nose. Scholastic decided that this was a bit much, so Jacobus redrew the gnome scratching his head instead. The two bright pink flamingos serve to draw the eye down to the center of the image, where the orange and green of the gnome outfits contrast with the multitude of shadows of blue used for the bushes in the background. The secret star of the cover is the beautifully painted crystal ball, in which Jacobus used the light and dark colors to create the illusion of a clear, shining orb. At first glance, the enormous praying mantis on the cover of this book looks to be just that. Closer inspection reveals the metallic gleam and reflective surface of a robot. Again, Jacobus paints a time in between. The sun shines bright on the horizon as flaming oranges and hot pink clouds cover the top of the sky. Shock Street itself is interesting, as the houses in the background suggest a very wealthy neighborhood, adding a hint of humor to the illustration. The cover for The Haunted Mask juxtaposed a monstrous face with the image of a young girl. Similarly, The Haunted Mask 2 juxtaposes an incredibly old-looking face with a young boy. The jack-o'-lanterns and bag in the child's hand indicates that the book takes place during Halloween, like its predecessor. In trademark fashion, Jacobus plays with perspective, giving the illusion of the masked figure leaning forward. Mist floats up from the stairs behind the child. For this cover, Jacobus used silver and white tones to create the illusion of a transparent and glowing human coming down the stairs. With solid browns and wooden textures, the stairs, wall, and candles serve as a strong contrast to the ephemeral spirit. This is no strange perspective used in the illustration, and the colors are very realistic. Even the purple used on the banner is a subtle tone compared to Jacobus's often bright palette. In this case, the realism of the background actually enhances the scariness of the supernatural aspect of the image. Only in the Goosebumps series are the iconic hills, palm trees, and blue skies of Southern California the perfect backdrop for a snow-covered Yeti. Jacobus said that the title of the book made him laugh, but the drooling, pink and yellow-brown Yeti doesn't look very amused. The tilted mailbox and ripped-up light post indicate a rampage on an otherwise normal Pasadena street. When creating book covers, Jacobus often uses models or existing images to depict the figures. However, in the case of the titular shrunken head, he had to create the image from his imagination. He drew several different heads to pick the best one for the job. Then he drew a typical messy kid's room, leaving space on top of the dresser for the head. He cut out the various heads and placed them in the space until he found one that he felt looked perfect in that spot. And that's how Jacobus got his shrunken head. Several common Jacobus touchstones are depicted on this cover, including the tiled floor, warped perspectives, and, of course, a pair of Converse. When asked about his favorite Goosebumps cover, Jacobus mentions the Night of the Living Dummy 3. He loved drawing all of the dummies together on the cover. The lines of the floorboards are used to create the feeling of movement towards the subject matter, the family portrait of dummies. The background of junk is kept in two main colors, brown for the items in the light and purple for the items in the shadow. The orange colors stand out from the purples of the background and draw the eyes to the dolls, who are each creepy in their own way. Night of the Living Dummy 3 was the first Goosebumps book to feature a special tear-out trading cards and bookmarks inside, which would become a staple of future books in the original series. Another bit of trivia, this novel marks the shortest time between sequels in the original series, with only 9 months separating Night of the Living Dummy 2 and Night of the Living Dummy 3. Readers may never look at a white rabbit the same way again. Jacobus exaggerated the rabbit's mouth and tilted the perspective down towards it, creating the illusion of being sucked down to the creature. Again, we see Jacobus use a flat color and small pupils to give an animal a crazed expression, the same technique he used on the barking ghost. Similar to the cover of another Goosebumps book, Phantom of the Auditorium, the magenta curtains in the background are paired with a bright glow. The glow behind the curtains might conjure the thoughts of bright lights on a stage, or even stage fright. Egg Monsters from Mars is another one of Jacobus's favorite Goosebumps covers. In his autobiography, Jacobus said that it is scary to mix something ordinary, like a carton of eggs, with something creepy, such as a slime monster. He suggested that the unexpected inclusion of something frightening into an ordinary situation adds an element of surprise. Jacobus heightens the surrealism of the image with a strange perspective, again enhanced by his use of orange, red, and yellow tiles, and with the curve of the kitchen counter. The color and texture of the monster are particularly disgusting looking, and the black eyes add an element of evil. Perhaps the most fantastical Goosebumps cover of the original series, there is no hint of a real world or juxtaposition of a relatable setting in this illustration. The beast is blue and purple, somehow adorable and unsettling at the same time, but certainly not a normal animal. The background is full of strange, alien plants, and the sky is made up of gorgeous layers of yellow, pink, and purple. The moon reflects the striated light, adding to the sense of otherworldliness. Despite boasting the longest time between sequels, 3 years and 7 months, or about 40 books to be exact, Say Cheese and Die again has perhaps the most consistent imagery between the two book covers. Again, a skeleton family is depicted in a Polaroid image sharing a meal. This time, the scene depicts a family dinner in a kitchen, complete with a skeleton turkey and dead plants as the centerpiece. Jacobus uses orange as the main color scheme of this illustration, pairing it with the blue tablecloth and the purple accents on the walls of the kitchen to pop the figures out at the reader. Conjuring up images of the phrase, "It was a dark and stormy night," the Ghost Camp illustration is a suitably frightening cover for a book that Stein considers to be one of the scariest of the series. The overgrown foliage of the foreground and background of the painting hint at a derelict camp, and the invisible ghost children certainly don't help with that image. As usual, Jacobus did not get to read the story before creating the cover, and thus the focus is on a human girl, whereas the protagonists of the book are 2 boys. On that subject, especially astute readers might notice an interesting detail about the Converse sneakers in this illustration. One pair of the ghost shoes are pink, like the living girl, suggesting at least one of the ghosts is also a girl. The green monster hands that are the focus of the cover are so captivating that readers might not notice the lovely pink, vibrant orange, and deep blues making up the rest of the image. Instead of mixing colors together, which Jacobus often does for foliage or the sky, these colors are each in their own section. The wall on the left is curved, as is the door, creating the sense of a portal opening into the other room, which includes a trademark Jacobus tile floor. Ivana the Viking stands imposingly over the ancient silver treasure chest on this cover, commanding the reader's attention with her green eyes and angry stare. Although there is snow on the twisted tree and on the ground at her feet, Jacobus used patches of bright green grass to suggest a lush forest area. The sky glows bright pink near the horizon and fades from purple to dark blue, suggesting sunset. Once more utilizing white sacks to suggest trick-or-treating, the cover for Attack of the Jack-O-Lanterns is suitably creepy for a book released for Halloween. The jack-o'-lanterns on the children's, and the dogs', heads are all smiling cheerfully as they glow in the night. The use of blacks and grays for the figures' tops makes these smiles somehow sinister, as do the glaring owl and gnarled branches of the dead trees in the background. Again, we have the suggestion of light against the horizon, this time in a half circle, drawing the eye to the center figure. Note that the use of white around the edges and between the legs of the kids suggest an immensely bright light in the background, which is subtly unsettling. One of Jacobus's more straightforward covers, Count Nightwing is seen peering out of a coffin, holding dead flowers and with green mist emanting either from his mouth to the bottle labeled vampire breath or vice versa. Jacobus uses pops of white to add a shiny cast to the iron of the casket. The Count's face is suitably sinister, with dark points under the eyes highlighted by the shadows of the eye bags to create the immediately recognizable visage of a vampire. Less recognizable is the fact that Count Nightwing's face was modeled after Jacobus's reference photographer, Michael. This cover features something that is almost extinct in the United States: a telephone booth. The creeps are dressed in fashionable 90s clothing and resemble purple velociraptors. Jacobus uses his trademark pink sky, this time with blue instead of purple, to highlight the creepy trees in the background. The lines of the telephone booth and wooden fence in the background are curved to create an off perspective that adds to the, excuse the pun, creepiness factor. The frightening face and angry twig arms of the snowman form the center of this memorable cover. The red of the scarf is matched by the red of the mailbox tab, which is the only hint that the snowman is nearby society, as the snow covers everything around it except for a few dead plants. The moody blue clouds in the background of the image help draw the eye to the bright white figure. Note that the use of dark purple near the tops of the clouds and a greener tone of blue near the bottom of the sky, which helps to keep the dark sky bright. Jacobus also pulls the twig arms from fading into the background by adding touches of white to the edges. In what was surely an ecstatic few days on the job for Jacobus, the focus of this cover is a pair of enormous red Converse. The red and white of the shoes are mirrored by the surrounding birds, who also sport evil red eyes. The bridge and island below resemble the Golden Gate Bridge of San Francisco. The colors of the bridge, water, and forest are all muted slightly by a light fog effect, pulling the shoes and birds dramatically into focus. Instead of a more traditional Jacobus bright hot colors, the purples and oranges of the sky are also muted and cloudy. The horror on the chickenized Crystal's face is not just conveyed via expression. The reds and shadows on her face mimic old pulp horror comics faces. Jacobus used blue for the shading on the white feathers of the enormous chicken, keeping a few of the same shades of blue for the sky above. This time, the horizon is darker than the top of the sky, creating a moody storm background, enhanced by the lightning. Jacobus added patches of pink on the brown mud to give it texture and used that pink again on the wooden chicken house in the background. When asked about why this cover featured a giant monster hand when there were no monsters in the book, Jacobus explained that he generally paints the covers with very little information about the story. In fact, when he finally got the chance to read the novels years later, he was shocked by how well so many of the covers lined up with the story. Each of the walls in this room are drawn curved and painted a different color, creating a feeling of claustrophobia and surrealism. This mood is enhanced by the terrifyingly textured monster hand rising from underneath the bed. Jacobus added small glints of white paint to create the impression of the lightning from the window illuminating part of the room. Note that the interesting blue-tiled ceiling seems to mimic a night sky. In true Goosebumps fashion, this book blends an ordinary suburban neighborhood with the surreal, a pink, slimy, drooling monster. Bikes, cars, and mailboxes lie in a discarded pile under the enormous tongue. For once, the sky is remarkably normal looking in color, blue with white clouds, probably to help the pink of the blob monster draw the eye. One of Jacobus's top 10 all-time favorite covers, the enormous pink blob and the story itself are an obvious homage to the classic horror film The Blob. When asked why this was one of his favorite covers, Jacobus said that he wasn't sure, but he thinks it's because someone actually paid him to paint a giant tongue. Unlike some of his scarier monsters, Jacobus uses very realistic eyeballs to up the scare factor in this illustration. The ripples of the water are touched with white to create the impression of water shining in the light. The mist and directed orange light in the corner suggests a sunrise. The reader really gets the impression of the lake being cold, a feeling subtly influenced by the silver and white colors of the figure itself. Perhaps the most comical of all the original Goosebumps covers, this illustration features Jacobus's distinct bright colors, crazy-mouthed animals, tiles, and a fun perspective. It's almost the complete opposite of the previous cover's dark and morbid mood. The pizza and soda almost look hyper-realistic against the curved countertops and saturated pink, purple, and blue colors of the kitchen. The malformed fish on this cover looks more like an alien than a creature of the deep. Jacobus again uses the technique of a single-colored eye with a dotted black pupil to give the creature a crazed look, but this time he adds a bit of lighting and shading to make the orbs pop out of the fish's face towards the reader. The light on the background is striated to represent the sunlight shining into the waters. The background reef almost looks like a forest, and the shipwreck on the seabed hints at a danger of the water. Just in time for back to school, the cover of this book makes school appear scary. Haunted-looking faces peer out of the dark locker as gray books, tests, number 2 pencils, and even sneakers tumble out. The monochromatic junk is highlighted by the rainbow of colors filling the rest of the illustration, with a blue poster, green and yellow tiled ceiling, and orange and pink lockers. In addition to the bright colors, the line of lockers is curved, playing with the reader's perspective. Jacobus's signature makes up the title of a book in the cascade. The perspective, low and warped at the foot of the bed, and the close walls create a claustrophobic feel to this illustration. There are hints that the room probably belongs to a boy, including a sports banner for wolves, appropriately enough, a toy truck, and a tiny painting of a demon-like creature. The werewolf skin is unsettling enough as it is, but the bloodshot green eyes bulging from the face, in addition to the saliva-ridden teeth, take the creepy factor to the next level. Readers picking up this book in 1997 probably wouldn't guess that this monster depicted on the cover is named Kevin. Jacobus made the texture of the monster the focus of the cover, with ripples, red veins, and the use of rounded highlights to create a gross, globular effect. The purple eyes are matched by the shadows on the left side of the illustration, while sickly green at the top of the stairs and dull yellow on the floorboards are used for lighting moods. The 62nd and very last book of the original series received a fittingly quintessential Jacobus cover, an ordinary situation delightfully turned on its head. In this case, the ordinary place is a blue and pink bathroom, and the surreal is the disgusting slug-like monsters. Jacobus plays his greatest hits here: bright colors, warped perspective, a viewpoint on the floor, and multicolored tiles. The only thing missing is a pair of Converse sneakers. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and as always, thank you for liking and subscribing. I look forward to seeing you in the next video, and until then, stay safe out there.